And the very theme of this panel discussion today is integral to the history of the art of Santiniketan, the history of art of Kala Bhavana. And needless to say, this has been art is trying to create a very meaningful bond with nature, has always been something, an issue or an idea very close to the hearts of many artists all over the world in various capacities. In the context of Santiniketan, to set the ball rolling, I would like to request Shivda, Professor R Sivakumar, to begin with a small introductory note, and then we can follow up and go back and forth between Jogen and Shivda. So Shivda.
Thank you, Soumik. And well, I think those of us who were here and heard the memorial lecture just before got an inkling of the various ways in which Santiniketan and the ideas of nature, environment, and so on are very kind of connected in a very, very intimate way. Because we are going to probably just explore a small part of it today. And since I think both Jogen and I and Soumik, all three of us, have been interested in the arts, and so we'll probably look at it from that perspective. And to me, there can be 4 different ways in which we can study. I mean, that's not necessarily the only ways in which we can study, but maybe I would touch upon 4 of them. One was that certainly no other group of artists in India have painted nature so extensively or with so much love and care as the Santiniketan artists have done. And for them, nature gave them a sense of location, of belonging, and it kind of replaced what artists before them used, that is history and mythology. I mean, if you look at all their mentors of Nandalal, Nanda and all his friends, for them it was mythology, it was history that provided that sense of belonging. But in Santiniketan, it was nature that gave them that sense of belonging. And we come to the second. They did not see landscape painting as a record of the beautiful, the picturesque, or the sublime. I mean, of course these elements were there, but if you look at European landscape painting, they looked at all these as prospects of a place, those beautiful scenes of a place which can isolate, frame, and then paint. But these artists, and that's exactly the way the Indian artists who were trained in the academic schools also did. But artists who lived here and worked here, they tried to encapsulate the total experience of the place and the land. And they used such formats as the long scroll or murals covering entire walls or ceilings. And when they didn't do that, they did drawings in hundreds and watercolors in hundreds, as Nandalal and Vinod Bihari and so on, and Ramkinkar did. And they almost give us a 360-degree view of the place. Maybe not all in one image, sometimes they did that, but when they didn't do that, they tried to give us that 360-degree view of a place through innumerable little drawings and watercolors. And not only just a place as it existed, but as it existed through the hours of the day and the seasons of the year. And the third difference, and what is distinguishing about these artists, is they saw themselves reflected in these images of nature which they created. And there are several, bits of pieces that we can quote from their writing where they claim that. Nandalal, for instance, saying that you have a landscape and you put a little bird or a cow herd into that, and then he says that you are reflected in that little being. Or Vinod Bihari claiming that, saying Satyajit that if you have a landscape of the koi with a lonely palm tree, then you get the spirit of my life and my art. So they saw themselves reflected in nature. That was the third distinguishing feature. And the fourth was that Rabindranath and the Santiniketan artist used their representations of nature in song and pictures to cultivate a shared sensibility of the world and create a worldview among the members of the community, and then use that shared sensibility to construct a very secular community here. So it was also a strategical one in the end to build up a new community which would be more based on a sensibility constructed or formed by responses to nature. So these four features, I think, are very distinctive of the response of the Santiniketan artists to nature. And I think that set them apart from the rest of the Indian artists.
Thank you, Shweta. Now, I would like Jogendra to respond to something more on a personal note. 1987 has been a very crucial turning point in your life. That is the year when we were still students, and you decided to leave Delhi, the capital city of India, and move to Santiniketan as the teacher, the professor, faculty in the Kala Bhavana Department of Painting, and your relationship, more real, physical relationship with Santiniketan and its flora and fauna and the nature, perhaps starts in a very meaningful way from that point of time. Particularly looking at the works of Santiniketan Masters, as Shweta has already mentioned, gets a very new perspective. The sheer fact that now, since 1987, you have been a resident of Santiniketan, a part of this natural surrounding. So, from that point of view, how would you like to respond to this issue, nature-art bonding in the context?
Rabindranath Tagore has made the paintings here. Many of his paintings, what we see here after coming or before coming, into landscape where the sun setting with bright orange color behind the trees, those paintings particularly. And also, even I heard that while he used to come by train to Calcutta, from Calcutta to Santiniketan, he used to see the sun setting while coming from Calcutta to Santiniketan. Many of his paintings have that orange colors, in the sky with dark colors and trees mostly in dark, hiding the sun and also the sky. So those are, I think, one of his most extraordinary paintings. And then also from Santiniketan he made a lot of paintings like that. So this is, we find from Tagore's work. So then we see the works of Nandalal Bose, Visva Bharati and Raman Sivakumar. Since we have enough nature here and the location is totally different from city, where from I came from Delhi. So they were involved in these surroundings. most of the works that we see by these three great artists, after Tagore or besides Tagore, they have seen the nature, the trees, these flowers, these, the leaves of the trees. We see that Nandalal Bose has made a lot of flowers. Vinodda has also painted a lot of flowers of this place, and they are all very important artworks as drawing, as watercolor or painting. And Raman also has painted the surroundings, the trees and surroundings, landscapes. They are all, I think, one of their, they are quite important artworks for our whole, creative areas. So I think that this is very, these are very important contribution to our art. So I think that so behind that, what I feel is interesting, this nature gave them a particular style. You see the Ramkinkar, Vinod, Nandalal, they have all Oriental experiences, and also the style of Southeast Asia. But they again has created a typical different style while they were working in Santiniketan. For me, I found that how this style grown is, when Nandalal Bose went to this, Ajanta and Ellora and all these places, and there were, the paintings of a very decorative style. And Nandalal came here, and he was already seeing the local Shantals, their, the children, the people, how they are, moving, how they are working. So those figures got a typical, typical, relationship, when he painted these people with after experience of Ajanta and Ajanta particularly, those figures, and they are, they has a, they started getting that decorative pattern in the construction of the figure. This is something very interesting, and I think we should be, carefully studying this area, since they are also exactly not like the Japanese or Chinese painting. You see, they are not really of that, but Nandalal Bose, when he came from Calcutta, he was just, he had the experience of only, he was having that, having that experience of making painting like Rabindranath. Rabindranath has not, in his work, it is not there. But in Nandalal, he got that idea of that decorative things, but he mixed up with the construction of the figure. I mean, how the legs are bent, then the joints of the fingers and hands. So this is something I find very special in his work, and that also influenced probably partly to Vinodda and also Ramkinkar, but Nandalal made it very clearly different, and I think that is a special thing which was contribution of Santiniketan School. And then I find that this was also has come to Manida's work in a different way. Manida has made it a little simpler way, probably due to his experience in design and his experience in design and working with handloom board. So when he started it, he kept that mobility of the figure. When it expands or bends, that is there, but the detail form like Nandalal Bose was not doing like that, but he get that the mobility of the figure. I think. So this is interesting that certain certain special feature was created by this artist in the making of figure, which is something very important to observe, I think. It is really important.
I'll come back to you, Jovinda. Meanwhile, I would like to see how Shita.
Or perhaps all this would not have happened without Rabindranath, because before anyone else, he is the one who really started looking at nature very closely. And so much so before, or just about the time Kala Bhavana was founded in 1921, he's already writing, to Prashanta Mohan saying that I am almost sure that I am the first one who made the land of Bengal a fit subject for literature or something like that. So this is 1921. And so he was the man who was really behind this, who wanted to kind of think. And these three artists, more than anyone else in Bengal, contributed to the expansion of this idea. So that's there, and nature was there, for each one of them. They also looked for a certain kind of art language. And for Nandalal, it was an art language which he saw in Ajanta, which he also saw in certain aspects of Japanese art. And why was he interested in that? It was a language which was so flexible that one could be, highly, naturalistic, and at the same time one could move into narration or into decoration. You can overlap these things and shift gear or registers very quickly and hold them together. So it was a very interesting style, which unlike the European academic style, or unlike maybe, let's say, Art Nouveau, which was another decorating style of the same period, this was something which was much more flexible. So I think he used these aspects of Ajanta, and he connected them with what he saw in certain phases of Japanese art and so on. So it is a kind of, not just one particular tradition, but he was always finding links between these different traditions, and in which many of them did, with different kind of emphasis, not just like Jogen was saying of Subramanian. Similarly, you can say about Vinod Bihari, who also looked at these possible linkages between the Asian traditions. Ramkinka, although he looks on the surface a little more Western in his approaches, especially in his drawings and watercolors, he has a great deal of the methods of the Far Eastern artists. And you can immediately distinguish, because every line that these artists put, Vinod Bihari or Ramkinka, which looks like a scribble, but is actually a contour in space. Nothing is just a flat decorative touch, and that is where their work is absolutely fabulous. And to a certain extent, this is also true of Nandalal, although he did a certain amount of ornamentation, much more than these other two artists, because I think in the first phase of Indian nationalism, it was necessary for them to invent an Indian classical tradition to counter the European classical tradition, and Ajanta provided them with that. But if you can look at Vinod Bihari and Ramkinka, both of them move away from the classical to the pre-classical or the post-classical. They completely avoid the classical. And that was an interesting shift they did within the larger framework of their practices.
And Shivta, your book on Santiniketan artists, somewhere you write, rather you refer to one of the major ideas of Rabindranath Tagore, and you write that one of the significant aspects of this bonding between transforming dialogue. So, is it at the stylistic level only, or there are other implications to this idea?
No, it is not at the stylistic level. You are transformed as a person. These are experiences of great kind of thing. If you look at the Nandala's drawings, I mean, each time you look and learn something, you are finding a little more about yourself. And for these artists, these were not just techniques, these were not, I mean, glib methods or successes in image making, but it was an exploration of their own selves as well as the world. And you can't separate these two things. For any serious person, whether it's a writer, artist, whether there's a writer or a painter, I mean, I think the most fundamental thing is to know the world and know oneself. And these are two interlinked projects. And these are artists definitely who worked at that level.
Thank you, Shekhar. Jogen, I would like to recall something that you have told me recently, that you started looking at the artists of Santiniketan, and particularly from this context of natural bonding, more closely and more intensely from the time you started teaching. As a teacher, perhaps you responded to their process of thought, working, everything. Would you like to elaborate on that? How, as a teacher, your teaching experience?
I was a student in Government College of Art and Craft. There, our method of teaching, of life study, study of tree, foliage, etc., was totally different than what I saw here after studying the work of Nandalal Bose. In our art college, we were working like, making a tree, like a photograph. The way of lines were not actually lines, they were just, sometimes shadows. Making, only shadows of the tree and developing the whole thing like a still life, etching. So when I came here, I studied, I saw more, minutely the work of Nandalal Bose, then how the trees are growing. The tree is not as just a shadow object, like a photographic object. Like, when we make sometimes portraits, we just give the shades and then gradually find the light and shade, and we make the thing. And also in drawing also we used to do in our art college like that. But I find here it is happening, from the construction side, how the tree is constructed, how the trees, each branch is growing out of the main body, how the the roots are happening. So I found that there are some several works of Nandalal Bose where like Bod Gaj or Ashwatha Gaj, how he made the drawing so that it is really, you see that how the trees have been grown, how the branches have grown, and from main body to, finer branches, and then how the leaves are coming. So like that. So you actually learn, the construction of the tree. So this is very important. And then, of course, you can give shades or whatever, like accordingly, not really how photographically it is, but how it makes an artwork with lines and balance of, forms and colors, how it is composed. So this is important. It is not that I do the work, just photographically, that it looks like a image exactly like it is. But I find that it is, you know how it is constructed, which is important. So that was also a learning for me. I was, of course, doing very, fine drawings with unknowing this part of, how the construction is being happening there. So I think that this is important here. And then I also have another observation, between two great masters, Rabindranath, painting of flowers or Palash or something, and also Nandalal. Nandalal has, there are differences between two persons. See, their personality was different. Nandalal made, Palash with meticulous drawing, of course with construction, how it is constructed. But Tagore's thing was more, looks like it has more spiritual quality. It gives a sense of infiniteness. So, which is also to observe. I mean, it really gives understanding how true personality is different. It is, of course, all the Tagore's work, it is like illuminating. It is something like which is sense of infiniteness is there, a sense of abstraction is there. So these are there, but they are all connected with nature. So it is interesting, which I observed, and when I was teaching to a student, this making the construction of anything like a human figure also, we'll have to feel that the figure drawing is not just like a still life we cannot do it. That we just give tones and with pencil or color, but we should see that how the figure has been constructed. Even a chair table, how it is constructed, how it is interrelated with the top and the legs, etc. So this is also, I find that Maniga was very conscious of this thing, that his whole, the construction of drawing or figure was on the basis of this idea. So this is what is interesting and what is, I think, very important also. And I used to teach my students on that basis.
Thank you, Jogendra. And I think, is it time for the audience to respond and ask anything?
Any questions from the audience? We have time for a few responses or questions.
Not ornamentation, but it's a tendency of adding grace or lavanya to it. So it was not only the construction. I mean, if you can just put some light on that.
Actually, grace comes from the personality. You cannot give that will automatically come to the work.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I have patience here. আপনার form, আপনার কিছু কাজের মধ্যে যে কিছু distortion মতো interpreted হয় by common people, সেটা কোথা থেকে আসছে, এরকম ভাবে আপনি influenced হয়েছেন? যেটা আপনার ইচ্ছে না, ইংরেজিতে বলুন, অনেকে আছে।
Naturally, that was no, there are, the around us, there are always, nature and also people. So people influences me much. I'm seeing people, observing people from my childhood. Since, and then we had a very different social situation when we, I came from east part of Bengal after partition. So from that time, we had a lot of hard time, but the hard time teaches us very deeply. So I saw people around me, and I saw people since that time, and we were growing along with them. And I cannot really come out of people's problem. So in my work, you can find that people is dominating. I'm not really a landscape painter in any case, but I did some creepers, some trees which have got more construction area, which I find that I have lyrical qualities, but not really involved in nature. In my work, you cannot see that. But it is part of construction. It is when we distort, we construct. Suppose we construct the artwork. While we distort, we construct the artwork. Since it is not only in art of painting or art of drawing, but it is in every area of art form, we can find it. Like in music also. I give an example. In music, there is a line which is written in few words, and then we elongate it to way. So that means it is actually we are distorting it. Even in miniature painting like Rajasthani or other miniature paintings, they are distorted. They are not real. So when we make it unreal, they are also distorted. So the fact which is always there, we find every artwork when we change the color, it is also distorted. When we change the tone, it is also distorted. When we change the figure, figure to make another, so we can, if we have examples here, we could show how it has been done through very simple and easy thing in creation. Distortion is always there. Even when we put a light and shadow in a different way, it is also distorted. So like that.
Thank you.
From Bangladesh, there are 4 of us or 5 of us from Bangladesh. You are a very popular artist there, and you are known for your very bold works, and also the thing that you just said, the distortion of human figures and the lines that you draw. এই যে পিঠের এইখানে বিশাল এক দাগ হয়ে যাবে, body দুই ভাগ হয়ে যাচ্ছে. Also like, the cat with his nails trying to catch the moon, and the use of very bold colors, and the way suddenly a Buddha-like figure, a child, but there is a sense of beauty. But what I find there more is the sense of violence. আপনার কাজের মধ্যে. So আপনি যতক্ষণ বললেন ওনার প্রশ্নের উত্তরে that নেচারের সবকিছুই distorted. বেসিক ফর্মে তো ডিস্টরশন, পরে গিয়ে সুন্দর হয়, খুব সংহত হয়, খুব আপনার কি বলে, there is this harmony. But আমি তা দেখি না, আপনার কাজকে আমি মোর দেখি যে very violent. And is there any specific reason, like you didn't say anything about any political side of it that there could be? I do not know what goes on in your mind when you draw such kind of figures and forms and different things, totally distracted also, not only distorted. So, কোনো political undertone আছে কিনা?
No, I think it is social situation. When we came from the east part of Bengal, we were displaced, at least for quite some time. So that was an experience for us, and we saw how people were having difficult times. And that time, that is not the reason that we became, so it was you said that violence as well as distortion and distress, what you say?
Yeah, brutalization.
Brutalization. No, but we had many other experiences afterwards. You see, we have seen riots. We have seen, riots in Gujarat, So that made us also, there were killings in Bengal, west part of Bengal, in political violence was there. So these are things we were really observing and got affected. So we cannot get out of it, we cannot get rid of this. So that came to my work, and also I remember that the tiger you may be talking about, tiger in the moonlit night I made in Delhi. That was, I wanted to make a mockery of the, that emergency, So it was just a, emergency. See, it was fun. So I made the paper tiger. You see, I said that it's just a paper tiger, but of course it was affecting the society. So that sort of sense of humor and fantasy, as well as some social message was there. It has a broken teeth, the tiger. So that I wanted to make a fun and mockery of that emergency. But then there were other drawings. My works are mostly in drawing, developed drawing with colors and pastels. I do a lot of paperwork. So I find it, it gives me more intensity when I work in my own technique with lot of cross lines. So they give, that I really have the feeling of, that depression. The depression in our life in Bengal is still lot of, the time is still going on with lot of, there is, happiness is not still there. Though Rabindranath Tagore was having an idea about our life, but we still are not getting that life yet in our society. So that gave me also a sense of depression, that we are not yet having that sort of life which is full of peace, full of joy, full of music. But there are so much problems, so much hunger, so much difficulty in having shelter to stay. They are still in the street. So I think that gave me, all through I feel depressed with this. That's why it should be like that. So this is what makes, my work also becomes dark, black. I have written about it in detail, so I don't want to, repeat all those things. But this is all connected with the social situation and also my personal. I was working in, when I was in art college, we had no electricity in the house. So I used to work in the hurricane lab, and I started working with black. So that black continued to stay, and until there is no joyful life in our society, I cannot have a really bright situation in my artwork also, bright expression.